Oldham isn't the first place most people associate with high-level drug trafficking, but beneath the surface of this greater Manchester town, a ruthless county lines network was quietly flooding the streets with heroin and cocaine, orchestrated by a group of men who believed they were untouchable. Their operation was deliberate, structured, and deeply exploitative. They didn't just sell drugs. They recruited the vulnerable, preyed on desperation, and expanded their reach using fear, violence, and encrypted communications. At the center of the network was Mohammed Rahman, a man who played the role of puppet master. With his orders, the streets were kept stocked, runners were deployed, and anyone who resisted was swiftly dealt with. Alongside him stood a tightly knit group of trusted lieutenants and facilitators, each responsible for moving large quantities of Class A drugs across Oldham and beyond. The gang's ambition was clear: fast money, local dominance, and total control. But what they didn't see coming was an extended, methodical investigation by Greater Manchester Police's Serious and Organised Crime Group. Over months, officers gathered digital evidence, tracked movements, and built a case strong enough to dismantle the entire network. This is the story of a criminal enterprise that thrived on misery, and how it was finally brought down. The roots of the Oldham County Lines operation stretched deeper than many realised. It didn't emerge overnight, and it wasn't the work of a few reckless individuals. This was an organised criminal network, calculated, compartmentalised, and quietly expanding its reach over time. At its helm was Mohammed Rahman, a 28-year-old from Chadderton, whose reputation in the area was one of quiet dominance. He wasn't loud or showy. He didn't need to be. Those who knew of him understood his authority, and those who didn't quickly learned what crossing him meant. Rahman built his operation in stages, beginning with local contacts. He wasn't dealing hand-to-hand. He was coordinating from a distance, using encrypted phones, coded language, and secret drop locations to maintain control while shielding himself from direct exposure. It was a system designed for resilience. If one runner was arrested, another could step in. If a phone was seized, another was already in play. He began by recruiting from within Oldham, individuals with debts, criminal records, or personal vulnerabilities that made them easy to manipulate. Once the local structure was in place, the network expanded outwards. Rahman's contacts included suppliers from across Greater Manchester and distributors who could push product into surrounding towns. He used county lines tactics to extend reach without drawing attention, sending drugs via couriers, exploiting young people to avoid detection, and using vulnerable adults' homes as storage and distribution hubs, known in police circles as shukuing. The first signs of trouble didn't come from a high-profile bust, but from a steady increase in Class A drug-related crime across Oldham. Community reports, rising levels of violence, and unexplained absences among vulnerable young people hinted at something bigger. Police suspected county lines involvement, but without names, vehicles, or patterns, the picture was incomplete. Rahman's lieutenants played a crucial role in building out the network. Men like Anwar Rally, Jamal Ali, and Jason Wakeford weren't simply involved. They were vital to the operation's expansion. Each had their own connections, territories, and methods. Together, they formed a web that could move substantial quantities of heroin and cocaine across boroughs with speed and precision. What they didn't realize was that their confidence, their belief that the system protected them, was also what made them traceable. The cracks had already started to show. The police were watching, quietly but relentlessly. The Oldham drugs line wasn't held together by chance. It was built with precision, a patchwork of roles, contacts, and responsibilities spread across the borough and beyond. At its core, Mohammed Rahman ran the operation like a business. He rarely touched the drugs himself. Instead, he managed the logistics from behind a wall of technology and loyalty. He used encrypted mobile phones, operated in short bursts of communication, and made sure no single point of failure could bring the whole thing down. Below Rahman were the enforcers and organizers. Anwar Rali served as a key distributor, not simply a runner, but a man who ensured that the pipeline of heroin and cocaine stayed unbroken. He managed the flow of product, oversaw street-level dealers, and relayed instructions from Rahman to the people on the ground. He wasn't just moving packages. He was keeping the machine oiled, directing the drugs into the hands of the vulnerable, users, addicts, and often children who were trapped in the web. Jamal Ali, another core figure, was responsible for organizing transportation. He knew the safe routes, the quiet hours, and the clean vehicles to use. When police finally traced movements linked to the gang, they found routes that avoided cameras and high-risk zones, evidence of planning that went beyond petty crime. Ali also managed payments. Prosecutors later revealed he had access to significant sums of money and coordinated criminal finances to keep cash moving without raising flags. Jason Wakeford was the group's logistics man. His role involved securing properties for storage, coordinating drop-off points, and ensuring that product got from supplier to street without interruption. He liaised with runners, some barely out of their teens, instructing them on when and where to move. When a delivery went wrong, Wakeford was the fixer. And then there was Mohammed Aman, one of the most dangerous elements in the network. Aman sought out the weak, young, desperate, often isolated individuals who could be manipulated into working for the gang. He promised money, protection, or purpose. But what he delivered was fear. Police said Aman was one of the network's most exploitative recruiters, responsible for drawing people into the gang's orbit, often by force or coercion. Together, these men operated like cogs in a well-oiled machine. Their goal wasn't just profit, it was dominance. They moved heroin and cocaine worth hundreds of thousands through Oldham streets, leaving addiction, crime, and fear in their wake. What set this operation apart from many others wasn't just its scale, it was the level of control the gang exerted over every part of the chain. Mohammed Rahman didn't just oversee drug supply, he controlled people. Runners weren't hired, they were owned. Many of them were teenagers or vulnerable adults coerced into servitude through threats, addiction, or false promises. Some were groomed with gifts and money, others were blackmailed or beaten into silence. Rahman ran the show from the shadows, issuing instructions through encrypted devices, sometimes only active for hours before being swapped. He avoided physical contact with the drugs but made key decisions on supply levels, prices, and punishments. Police described him as a manipulator who used fear as currency. If a runner was caught, another was already waiting. If someone questioned his authority, they were made an example. Jason Wakeford and Jamal Ali helped enforce this control. They managed the day-to-day logistics, drop-offs, safe houses, car swaps, but they also enforced discipline. Wakeford, in particular, maintained order among lower-level gang members. He kept the drugs moving and made sure no one got ideas above their station. Anyone showing signs of disloyalty could be cut out instantly, sometimes with threats of violence. Mohammed Aman's role was more sinister. He wasn't just a recruiter, he was an enforcer who specialized in manipulation. He targeted those already on the fringes, young people in care, those struggling with addiction, people sleeping rough. He offered quick money, somewhere to stay, protection from other gangs. Then he closed the trap. Once someone was in, they couldn't walk away. Those who tried were followed, intimidated, or worse. The gang used cuckooing as a central tactic, taking over the homes of vulnerable users and turning them into drug dens. These properties served as storage and temporary bases for dealers. The residents, often addicts themselves, were threatened into compliance. Some described being locked in rooms or physically assaulted if they objected. Violence wasn't the gang's first tool, but it was never far away. Weapons were found during arrests, and coded messages referenced sorting problems or shutting down leaks. The implication was always clear. Step out of line, and there'd be consequences. For a time, it worked. Fear kept mouths shut. Control kept the money flowing, but behind closed doors, the gang's grip was slipping, and the walls were beginning to close in. For months, the Oldham gang operated without obvious challenge, but cracks had already begun to form. Their own sophistication became their weakness. Every encrypted message, burner phone, and car swap left behind digital and physical evidence that, when pieced together, revealed the structure they'd worked so hard to hide. Behind the scenes, Greater Manchester Police's serious and organised crime group had been gathering intel, watching and waiting. Community intelligence was the first warning sign. Reports of vulnerable residents being threatened, young people going missing during school hours, and a spike in heroin-related overdoses drew the attention of safeguarding teams. Several victims, when approached by outreach workers, hinted at being controlled or owed money. It wasn't enough for charges, but it was a start. Police analysts began compiling data. Automatic number plate recognition, ANPR cameras picked up vehicles repeatedly travelling between drop-off locations and known drug hotspots. Surveillance footage revealed key players, including Wakeford and Ali, meeting outside safe houses, often at odd hours. It was clear the meetings weren't social. Digital forensics proved critical. Despite efforts to stay off-grid, phones were linked by call records and shared Wi-Fi connections. One device, seized from a runner during a separate arrest, was found to contain messages from Rahman's number. Though encrypted, metadata revealed regular communication patterns, with timings that aligned closely with known drug movements. This, combined with GPS data and cell tower triangulation, created a web of connections too tight to ignore. Even more damaging were the slips from within the gang. One associate, arrested on an unrelated matter, began cooperating. He provided insight into how cuckooed properties were selected, who handled cash, and who issued threats. Under questioning, he confirmed that Rahman never touched drugs directly, but described him as the one they all answered to. Meanwhile, a planned delivery went wrong. A courier carrying thousands in Class A product was stopped, and when the package was traced back, it led directly to Ali's network. Phone data from the courier linked him to meetings with Arman and Wakeford. The illusion of control was gone. What had once seemed like a seamless operation now showed gaps. In communication, in discipline, in the loyalty of its members. And with evidence stacking up, police prepared to strike. When Greater Manchester Police launched their final phase of the investigation, the gang had no idea how much had already been uncovered. Dubbed Operation Voyager, the coordinated takedown involved surveillance teams, firearms units, and specialist officers trained in dismantling organised crime groups. The goal wasn't just to arrest a few runners. It was to collapse the entire hierarchy, from street-level dealers to the top of the pyramid. The raids began in the early hours, targeting multiple addresses across Oldham, Chadderton, and surrounding boroughs. Officers executed simultaneous warrants at homes, safe houses, and stash points. Mohammed Rahman was taken by surprise at a residential address he had been using intermittently. Police found encrypted devices, cash, and handwritten notes detailing quantities and locations, a direct link to the operation's infrastructure. At another property, Jason Wakeford was arrested alongside several burner phones and scales used for packaging drugs. In his vehicle, hidden compartments contained wraps of heroin and cocaine ready for street distribution. Jamal Ali was picked up hours later after returning from a meetup that had been under surveillance for weeks. His phone, when analysed, contained messages coordinating deliveries and referencing coded drop locations. Mohammed Arman was one of the last to be apprehended. Found in a flat occupied by a vulnerable addict, a clear example of cuckooing, Arman initially gave a false name, but police were already certain of his identity. Inside, they recovered weapons, cash, and a stash of Class A drugs, along with evidence of coercion involving the occupant. The takedown was swift but meticulous. Each arrest brought with it more devices, more data, and more links in the chain. Forensic teams worked through the material in shifts. Phones, notepads, fingerprints on packaging, and digital records tied each man to key elements of the supply network. More than £750,000 worth of heroin and cocaine was seized in total. But even more crucial was the narrative the evidence built. It showed hierarchy, coordination, and most importantly, intent. This wasn't casual dealing. It was organised exploitation and industrial-level trafficking. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Johnson, who led the operation, described it as one of the most significant county lines disruptions in Greater Manchester in recent years. The team hadn't just removed drugs from the streets, they dismantled a system that preyed on the vulnerable and operated with impunity for far too long. With the ringleaders behind bars, all that remained was to bring the case before the court. The courtroom at Manchester Crown Court was filled with anticipation. After months of investigation and weeks of testimony, the final reckoning had arrived. 5 men, once the architects of a sprawling county lines drug empire, now stood in silence as the judge delivered sentences that reflected the scale of the misery they had unleashed on Oldham's streets. At the centre was Mohammed Rahman, 28, described by the prosecution as the undisputed controller of the network. He received 14 years in prison for orchestrating the movement of heroin and cocaine across Greater Manchester. The court heard how Rahman never touched the drugs himself, but ran operations through layers of contacts, encrypted phones, and loyal lieutenants. He maintained control through fear and ensured that those beneath him carried out his orders without question. Mohammed Aman, one of the gang's most exploitative figures, was jailed for 8 years. His role in recruiting vulnerable people, often children and addicts, into the criminal enterprise was described as cold and calculated. The judge labelled his actions as predatory, noting how he had manipulated desperation for personal gain. Jason Wakeford, responsible for logistics and maintaining the flow of Class A drugs to dealers, received a 7-year sentence. The court was told how he managed distribution points and safe houses, using coded language to avoid detection. He was found with evidence linking him to multiple drug drops and packaging operations. Jamal Ali was handed a 5-year sentence for his role in coordinating transport and handling the gang's finances. He acted as a key conduit between Rahman and the runners, managing the practicalities of distribution while avoiding direct involvement with the drugs themselves. Anwar Rally, identified as a primary distributor, received 3 years and 6 months. Though lower in the hierarchy, his role was vital in maintaining the network's day-to-day operations. During sentencing, the judge addressed the court with a stern warning. This group traded in addiction, fear, and the exploitation of the vulnerable. These sentences reflect the seriousness of your crimes, but they also send a message. This kind of harm will not be tolerated. Outside court, DCY Sarah Johnson expressed relief and determination. This is a victory, but not the end. The fight against county lines crime continues. For Oldham, the damage will take time to heal. But for now, one network has been torn down, and its architects will serve their time behind bars.